in as much as people would want to contend with how the reasons why we got here, I think it's very clear that we are still recovering from COVID. And nobody should pretend that we have overcome the effect and the impact of COVID. Number two, there's global economic crisis. It is not just Ghana. And I think we should establish that. But back to the point you made about our IMF program hinging on revenues. It's hinged on revenues because as a country, we do not collect enough revenues. And I think everyone must understand that. Compared to our peers, even within the region, we are doing 13% of GDP. If you go through Accra, you drive through Accra, you see the buildings in Accra, you see the cars being driven, you can tell that there is money in the system. And yet, what comes to the state to provide public service is not as happens in other countries. So there's a disconnect. There's disconnect between the GDP, what we produce as a nation, and what comes to the state to deliver public service. And that is why it's important to look at our revenue generation. How are we doing? I've heard, I'm sitting with the Govt president, so my ears are already full with how much taxes we are collecting and the pressure we are giving them. But do businesses pay enough taxes? Do professionals pay enough taxes? Do those, well, you cannot be in the UK, you're studying in North End and Prof. If you pay a house help, she will pay taxes. Do we get our masons, our house helps, our electricians, and all of those professionals to pay taxes? So there's a disconnect. But they expect government to provide them with public services. Winston, give me a minute. The other thing is that do businesses pay the taxes that they should be paying? If you went around Makola, do you think that the incomes that the businesses there earn, they are paying enough on their income taxes? In other countries, people pay about 20 to 30% of their income as taxes. How many chief executives in Ghana, we see them all over, how many of them pay taxes on their incomes? So there's a disconnect, and I think that it's important we recognize that. Okay. Now to expenditures. When we talk about government expenditures, the biggest expenditure is compensation. How do you reduce compensation? In other countries, when they are in crisis, they lay people off. They lay workers off. In fact, in some jurisdictions, they lay policemen off. They lay teachers off. Here in our country, we haven't laid anyone off. Indeed, that is more of a social welfare system than actual expenditure management. We do not lay anyone off. In fact, there's pressure on government to take on more nurses and more teachers. And you are saying we should cut down expenditures. This year, ask Ministry of Education and Ministry of Health. We haven't been able to employ a single trainee. We haven't added any more people on our payroll. So that is an expenditure cut. Are Ghanaians willing to make those sacrifices? That should be, in fact, if we can reduce our compensation budget, which is about 51 billion, by 10%, that 5 billion can fix a number of roads, can pay more than 20 contractors or 50 contractors. So if we reduce our compensation budget by just 10%, we are hovering around 51 billion. That is half of what GRA is collecting this year. So we are using half of the revenues generated to pay salaries and wages. Can we add on? No, so we haven't added on. So that is efficiency. We are reducing expenditure. In other years, we had added 40,000 annually. That translates into higher expenditures. So we have decided government has decided not to increase that expenditure. And nurses are at home, teachers are at home, because we cannot afford it. So if you want us to, it is not goods and services. And by the way, goods and services, the biggest expenditure on goods and services is health. And it's education. It's LEAP. It is school feeding. It is not, and that's why, even though I agree with you that we should cut our code according to our, not our size, but our resources. It is so difficult because it's so sticky. The areas that you can cut are so minimal. You cannot cut statutory funds. Let's get to the point of statutory funds. 20%, 25% of all revenues collected goes to statutory bodies. That is not money that comes to the Ministry of Finance for the Minister and Cabinet to make a determination as to discretionary expenditure. It is not available. But how are those money? 25% of your revenue goes to these statutory bodies. How are they managed? How are SOEs managed? So we need a whole of government approach to our budgeting, to expenditure management. How are SOEs performing? Some SOEs are behaving like we are not in a crisis. The chief executives, I don't want to go there, but it impacts on your fiscal. It impacts on the delivery of public service. So it is not, it's most of the discussions are very anecdotal. They are not based on facts. They're not based on the statistics. But Winston, you go back, don't take my word for it, go and pick the budget, look at the expenditures, look at the revenues, look at where government is spending money, and you tell me, give me a call, and tell me, Eva, I think that you cut the expenditures here, and I'll gladly look at it.
Okay.
Thank you.
We will do that. But before we do that, you talked about the number of people who pay taxes. And of course, that's part of the responsibility of government, is to ensure that people pay taxes. We've had this conversation over and over again. I'll start with the 2018 budget, when we indicated, for instance, that people needed tax identification numbers. And then we talked about it, and we said we had actually increased the number of people known to tax authorities. And those who have expertise in taxation will tell you, if you're known to tax authority, that's the first point. The next point is how you're able to get those persons to pay taxes. Part of your responsibility is, during coronavirus, you gave funds to over hundreds of thousands of entities, businesses, SMEs. Zimbabwe, one of the best examples of formalizing an economy, incentivizing the people. Once they got registered, bookkeeping taught, the next moment they were paying taxes to government. The question is, upon all the formalization so-called that we did during coronavirus for people to even come for funds, how many of these people's incomes are known to tax authorities and by extension paying taxes? Yeah. Okay, I think we're getting you another microphone, so you can start all over again. I think we lost you at a point. Okay, so we have a new microphone, yes.
It's back. Thank
Okay.
you. So you are right. We need to know, the state needs to know who is eligible to pay taxes. So that has been a challenge because we haven't really overcome our technological and technical issues. However, we are deploying some technology. I serve on the board of GRE, so I get to know what's going on there. So getting a robust tax database that helps us to know who is eligible to pay taxes is important, and we are working on that. We are also trying to work, as I said, I'm sitting with the president of Govt, and he's talking about VAT, but you know, there are a number of interventions that have been implemented over the years. Not all of them have been successful. But we also want Ghanaians to also become a bit more patriotic and responsible, because it's difficult for government alone. Just yesterday, to go about always asking people and pushing people to pay taxes. In a lot of countries, I know taxes are paid willingly. I mean, there's a date you have to file your taxes, and people actually run and ensure that they pay their taxes. Here, we do not have that. I mean, we have to really get a big whip and get people in line and ask, even though they know it is the law and it's their responsibility. And when you insist, they think that government is overbearing and government is too insistent. But we need Ghanaians to also partner governments. That this is, if we expect our roads to be done, we should also pay our taxes, because how else would government provide a public service that we so much need? So I think that some responsible Ghanaians should also take part of that responsibility. Not every time. I mean, if you look at the news, there are so many countries going through floods and climate change, the effects of climate change. Nobody's blaming government. But here, I mean, your road gets broken and they say government, and they are actually mentioning names. And they'll mention the name of my minister. And how is he in charge of floods? You know? In Cape Town, there are floods yesterday or this week. And nobody is blaming the government, but everything is government. And yet, we don't do our part of paying the taxes. Doctors, lawyers, nurses, business people. We don't want to go into details, but Joy and all the other news outlets, I want you to be a bit more detailed in your analysis of some of the things you do. And Winston, I like you. I watch you. I listen to you. I think it's important to delve into some of the numbers and see how much government is doing. And it was Prof. Gatti who said, we are not clear where we are going. Prof, let me assure you, we are very clear where we are going. We are extremely clear, because if we are not clear, we wouldn't have a program with the fund. We have a PCPEC program that we are implementing. Government has identified agric, and Prof. Jeche mentioned that. There's a clear program that government is implementing. In fact, last Friday, my minister met with 5 ministers in his office till late into the day, with the Minister for Agric, with the Minister for Agriculture, with the Minister for Trade, and agreeing on specific targets, and the Minister for Information. He will kill me if I don't mention him. But there are very clear targets that we are working to meeting, bringing inflation down, working to bring inflation down. And by the way, I'm talking about expenditures. Bank of Ghana is not giving us any money, so we are really working within the revenues that we are generating. When the revenues don't come in, no payment gets done. So that's why contractors, until the revenue comes in, until Guta and his team pays the taxes on imports and the VAT, we do not, unlike other countries, we cannot pay. Okay. So it's us, and when the revenues come in, that we are able to make payment.